My name is Aisha Gatling. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner board certified. I work for Access Behavioral Health Center, which is a subsidiary of Rawls Psychological Services. I attended Ultimate University. I got a bachelor's in biology. Then I went on to get a nursing degree at Norfolk State. I have an extensive ICU history, even working through COVID-19 on the front lines. And then I transitioned into a practitioner role in psychiatric care. I have been in psychiatric care now for 3 years with an expertise or clinical expertise in more acute cases. Okay, so a nurse practitioner is an advanced practicing RN, and our scope includes being able to assess patients depending on your specialty area, prescribe medications, and at times we do provide alternative options, resources to improve the patient as a whole. And we understand that the body is a system, and we work in a holistic approach to just make sure that all needs are being met. I work at Access Behavioral Health. It's a subsidiary of Raw Psychological Services. At Access, we focus on patients that are in a more acute phase of a mental health episode. So a patient that isn't quite meeting guidelines for hospitalization, but needs a little bit more intervention that a private practice may not be able to provide on a day-to-day. So we have a walking opportunity where if a patient is experiencing any emergent symptoms, but they don't qualify to be hospitalized, we will treat them. For example, if a patient is having like psychotic symptoms where they're hallucinating, they are not sleeping for days, or they're having thoughts of harming themselves, but they don't have a plan to do so, we offer a walk-in service and we treat them from that perspective and follow up acutely. So I see a variety of patients. I see patients that are chronically schizophrenic that may be having an acute episode. I see patients that are bipolar that may be having an acute manic episode, or even some that may be hypomanic. I see patients that have a trauma history or have new traumas, and depending on what the needs are, if they are emerging psychotic symptoms or positive symptoms at that time, that's who I generally see. I also see some patients that struggle with thoughts of hurting themselves or others, but because they don't have a plan, the hospitals may say, hey, you don't meet criteria for inpatient, but here's a facility that might be able to help you. Thomasine Johnson we previously met at my previous practice, where I was doing mainly private practice for the lifespan of care with mental health. And we met when her daughter was having an acute episode. So I treated her daughter for a short time. And then she closed out the case. So she continued her outpatient supports where she didn't need any more mental health help from me. And I was familiar with the family. So once the incident occurred, she reached out to my practice and she asked if I would take her case, being that I no longer saw her daughter. And I agreed to take her case from a psychiatric perspective and a psychotherapeutic perspective. She did make me aware of the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death when she called my office. Thomasine has a very irregular name, actually. So I saw some media going around and her name was mentioned. So I was familiar, but I never reached out. But for professional help, she did contact me first at my previous office. My understanding is that it was a mass shooting, and it occurred in her workplace, and there wasn't anything that she could have done to prepare for it. And it was an event that has shaped or morphed a family's life in a way that words can't explain. I have been treating Thomasine for approximately 19 months. Thomasine first touched base with me the beginning of December, and her first meeting with me was on December 9th, 2022. So when we first started, it was very intense. So I would see her for approximately 60 to 75 minutes 2 times a week. So our first schedule would be Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 6 to 7:30. And as time progressed, she's transitioned into a different phase of grief where she didn't need as immediate intervention. So now we're still at twice weekly, but we're only doing 45 to 60-minute sessions, and it's all virtual. So average, she's a weekly patient, bi-weekly, 2 times a week. I really can't put a number on it. More than 100, I would say. So when she initially came in, she was in a state of shock. As we know, grief has 5 different phases, right? So she came in, she was in shock. She was not sleeping. She had a darting eye appearance, meaning she couldn't make eye contact. She was tearful. She had her own box, her own Kleenex box that she kept on my desk, and we would just replace the box before she come into session. She was very tearful. And during the phase of shock, she would even sit in a chair with the door open for days and days, and this was the winter time, for days and days on end. So we grappled through that shock phase, I would say, for at least a month and a half. And then one day she came in very angry and she told me she slammed the door. So then we battled a phase of depression. That was an ongoing phase, and it still can rear its head every now and then. And then approximately 6 months ago, I noticed more of an aggressive phase or irritable phase, and it appears to be more anxiety right now. But we couple the state of grief, right, and the phases of grief with everyday environmental stressors. So at times it's hard for her to even manage her grief and her day-to-day hurt because of the stressors of life, right? Whether it be financial stressors, whether it be occupational stressors, whether it be home life stressors. So we continue to navigate it as it comes, and every day it evolves based on what she's experiencing. So Thomasine has a diagnosis of complex PTSD and generalized anxiety disorder. The complex PTSD, of course, is because of the most recent case with her daughter. She also has a chronic history of trauma aging back to childhood. But with the most recent incident, it has created what we call a hyperarousal state, often for Thomasine. So even things simple as concentration. She appears more irritable. She can appear more startled with things around her. And then she has a lot of problems with trusting. So things as simple as having her kids go to a social event at night, she can become more panicked with it just because she automatically assumes that something bad may happen to them. With her anxiety, it impairs her day-to-day function. Things as simple as working, and if the environment is too loud or if the environment is overstimulating by different things that's occurring at the time, it can be difficult for her to manage, but she continues to try to use her coping skills. And of course, as my psychiatric part, I do prescribe medications to help her manage things there. Her grief is affecting her every day in every part of her life, right? I do 2 forms of therapy with her, and in the one form of therapy, we have a goal, and the goal is to learn how to live with grief and learn who this new Thomasine is. Simple things as being able to deal with financial stressors. She's not able to cope effectively as she once was. So she becomes more tearful often. She can withdraw to herself often. And it impairs her ability to connect with her kids sometimes on a day-to-day basis. In life in general, she's now less social. She's very much minimized her circle of communication because she feels overwhelmed so often. She wakes up every morning and she has a phrase. Every appointment I ask, how are you doing? She says, I'm here, right? She can't relate to I'm having a good day anymore. She can't relate to it's okay. So within our therapeutic part of our sessions, we've incorporated a spiritual journey for her to help her make her day better. But she starts her day off with the ache that I can't relieve. So just implementing coping skills so that she can start that day and she can initiate that day and she can understand how to deal with some of the overstimulation she gets has been very important in her cure. Based on her background, she is from a lower socioeconomic background. We incorporate that with the ability to feel like you trust people and the ability to feel like you're supported. That can impair her day to day, and that can impair her in a long term way. And that's one thing that she continues to manage, I think, in a positive light on this journey. So she's definitely minimized her interaction with her extended family. She's implemented a smaller circle in communication that includes the immediate kids. And important to mention is, and during her journey or during her therapeutic journey, it often comes up the way the kids in the home are also challenged by the things that they're experiencing with their grief. As we know, with kids with depression, with trauma, with anxiety, they don't understand it. So she tries her best to manage her son who's having behavioral issues in school, or her daughter who doesn't talk much and withdraws to herself. And she's very much minimized her interaction with the extended family due to unwanted perspectives that can affect the way she's managing her own stressors and the way she's functioning on a day-to-day. So we continue to use cognitive behavioral therapy and dialect behavioral therapy, DBT. Through CBT, what we kind of do is we identify when our thinking is more negative. We identify when our thinking is based on perception and not truth. And then we focus on how to reframe that thinking so we can at least see the positive in different situations. A lot of time with anxiety, she enters into what we call a distortive perspective of things, and we call it cognitive distortion in CBT. So at times she will assume the worst in a situation, and that's how her brain will perceive things, because she often perceives things in a threat form due to her fight or flight mechanism being impaired with her PTSD. We also do DBT. DBT incorporates mindfulness, how we perceive things around us, and how to find the good in life after having trauma. So she is currently prescribed, fluoxetine 60 milligrams. That's an antidepressant, and it also has anxiolytic effects, which helps with anxiety, sadness, and basically coping with like intrusive thoughts, the thoughts that come at you often, that loop over and over again, that we also see with PTSD patients. So it quiets those thoughts. She's also augments with buspirone. Buspirone is an anxiety medicine. She takes 1 dose every morning, and that helps her thoughts to stop from racing. At times, and closer to this deposition, she's also increased her buspirone to a midday dose because she's constantly in a state of irritation or overwhelming or racing thoughts. She takes hydroxyzine, which is an antihistamine that also works to help with anxiety, to prevent her thoughts from racing at bedtime, because at night it appears that she focuses more on the passing of her daughter. She focuses more on missing her daughter, and that can hinder her ability to initiate sleep. So at 8 p.m. she takes another dose of hydroxyzine palmate, that's 25 milligrams. And right before bedtime, 30 minutes before bedtime, she takes trazodone. Trazodone is also an antidepressant, but it has sedative effects. So it helps to initiate sleep, and it helps her to stay asleep. She takes 50 to 100 milligrams of trazodone each night. Currently, she's at 100 milligrams of trazodone. Again, she takes that 30 minutes before bed. So coupled with the hydroxyzine, it would help her initiate and stay asleep. Thomasine has progressed from the initial treatment. As we mentioned, grief is not linear, right? But what I've identified is that she's able to navigate between more of a depressed and anxious state. So initially we had that shock, then we went to the denial phase, and then we got to a really severe depression. Now we're more to a more mild depression with anxiety that she kind of stays in, But what we do is we augment, or we make sure that we tap into those behavioral modifications and those coping skills to ensure that she can manage it day to day. But on average, I would say with the deposition closely approaching, I've noticed a regression in some of her symptoms. So she's more regressed to a more moderate stage of depression, where she has to tap into those skills a little bit more, utilize a little bit more of her anti-anxiety medications, because we're slightly regressing as expected during the current phase of the legislative procedure. Well, I very much see long-term psychiatric care, because, again, she's dealing with a long-term grief. From a therapeutic perspective, I anticipate she will continue with weekly psychotherapeutic sessions, with the opportunity for crisis stabilization if needed, if things become too overwhelming and she's not able to use some of the skills that's available to her. This is definitely a lifelong thing. The loss of her daughter is a thing that can't be replaced. And grief, again, it's not linear. It's cyclic. It's repetitive. You can regress during the phases. And while we may give coping skills, sometimes with emotional dysregulations, you can't tap into the coping skills. So having that support system to remind you how to utilize those coping skills will be a long-term thing. I think it was a tragic situation. And I think the family as a whole has been affected in a way that I don't think a lot of us are able to grapple with. And from a professional insight, even myself taking on the case, I had to rely on a collaborative team to debunk for at least 1 month into the case because it was a heavy case. And as I've transitioned through different phases of care and handling my patient, I still recognize that there's no amount of financial advancement that can replace the grief that this mom is experiencing. But I hope if we continue her on this mental health journey, and if we continue allowing her to understand where she is, that the family is able to remain optimistic and hopefully return to some place of normalcy, because I wish I could say they can heal. But what I've recognized in practice with a mother that loses her child, it's living with the grief.